I forgot how moving it is to be together. Mm. Well, I thought that when I came back from parental leave, that I would be revved up and celebrating this return to in person community that we have been preparing for and thinking that the pandemic was going to make available to us. And instead, this Delta variant has thrown us for a loop, and I've watched as the caseload has nearly doubled in the just over a week and a half that I have been back. There is new uncertainty for us as a religious community, but really for all of us. New needs to look again at potentially postponing one more time these celebrations in our own lives and in our communal life together. Postponing so many things we have so longed for. And we won't necessarily need to do that, but I know that I am feeling pretty disappointed that we're having to face these questions still. The disappointment on top of all of the other causes of grief in our life can be overwhelming at times, right? The racial disparity in COVID deaths and vaccination rates continues. The massive gun violence in Philadelphia and other places is unrelenting. The news is still full of the devastating signs of climate change, and one more report warning us that we must act now that again we will probably ignore. This on top of our personal griefs, the losses of loved ones and our hopes that have been shut down, the possibilities that didn't come to fruition, the expectations that haven't been met, the ways that our own bodies fail us, the ways that our communities fall short. I thought that we might be able to center joy today, but instead of centering joy, once again, I am reminded that grief always lives alongside our joy. At our denominational annual meeting this year, our General Assembly, Reverends Jennifer Nordstrom and Sherry Halliday Kwan led a service that included a lamentation ritual, a ritual of getting in touch with grief that is living within our bodies while taking a moment to lay some of that grief down, even if just for a short while. Reverend Nordstrom reminded us that when we honor the losses in our lives and in the world, when we notice and name what our hearts grieve, it can sometimes allow us to lay those losses down for a bit and allow our hearts to rest. And I don't know about you, but I can often be so stuck in my head, so attached to my to do list and all the things that I should be doing, and so attached to logic and being rational that I often struggle to notice what's in my body, to notice where my body is holding grief. Do any of you struggle with that? Did any of you struggle with that when Lauren invited you earlier to try to get in touch with the feelings in your body? Sometimes I can't even get in touch with what is in my body because my brain is going so fast. And so it was powerful for me as someone who gets too stuck up here to go through this lamentation ritual designed by Reverend Nordstrom. And I wanted to offer her ritual to you all today, slightly adapted with her permission and Reverend Sherry's permission, so that you might also have a chance to step out of your brain, step away from your anxious thought patterns, to touch those spaces within carrying grief, and maybe to lay that grief down, lay it aside, even if just for a short while. I think that for me, this offers a moment of healing and an invitation to greater wholeness, and I hope that it will offer that to you as well. And so, those of you who participate in worship while multitasking, which I know that I have occasionally done, you're trying to sweep the floor while listening to a sermon, I invite those of you who are doing that right now to maybe pause just for a moment and be present just to this one ritual. So these are the words of Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom. In this lamentation ritual, I'm going to invite you to set down those losses so you can rest for a moment. And if there's a loss that is too deep or it's too hard to put aside even for a moment, that's okay. Don't push yourself to do anything that's not what you need this morning. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to go within and explore your needs around loss and listen to your spirit and ask yourself if there's anything that you might witness or honor. And again, maybe put aside for now, knowing that you can take it back if you need to. You are held in the larger web of human grief and the even larger web of human love. There is a love holding us, we sing. There is a love holding all we love. There is a love holding all. We can rest in this love. We hold one another and are held by one another and by that capital L love that somehow can hold it all. During this ritual, I'm going to be ringing a singing bowl a few times to give you space to reflect. And at this time, I invite you to either grab that rock or jar that you might have grabbed earlier, or imagine an object that can hold your loss for you. Like Reverend Nordstrom, I prefer a rock. I've got a big, heavy, heart-shaped rock here. I like something that's solid, that feels up to the sturdy task of holding loss. But you might like a jar instead, or a box, something with empty space within it that can hold that loss for you. What would be best for holding your loss, your grief this morning? As I ring this bell, you can find your object or spend some time just imagining, visualizing this object to contain your loss. Losses are usually stored in our bodies. Everyone's body is different, and how and where we store that loss within us is different. But there's something about grief that tends to catch itself in our physical beings. So I invite you to check in with your body now. Check in and see if there's anywhere that you are holding grief. If it feels too overwhelming, maybe instead just imagine a safe place in your body or in your mind and go there. Sometimes it can help to close your eyes to do this, or just to soften your gaze and look at the ground. If you found a place of grief in your body, or if you're in your safe space, I now invite you to take a moment to ask your grief if it's willing to be in conversation with you. If it is, ask it what it wants you to know. What does your grief want you to know? And if your grief isn't ready to be in conversation yet, just ask your grief if you can be present with it right now. And take a moment to be with your grief. Having witnessed and honored your grief, would it be okay if you set it down just for a short time? In this next silence, I'm going to ask you to ask your grief if it's willing to rest in the container that you've prepared for it. It's your rock or your jar, whether it's imagination or in real life. Ask your grief if it's willing to rest in this container, and know that you can return to this grief anytime by returning to this container. If your grief says no and says it doesn't want to be moved, or if it feels too difficult to put it in a container, that's okay. Just check in again with your grief. Ask what it needs of you right now. But if your grief says yes that you can set it down for a moment, that you can take it out of your body, I invite you to do that and place it in your container. You might want to do this with emotion. Sometimes I literally take my hand and place it stored in my body and gently scoop it out and put it into the container in my imagination. Sometimes you can do this with your breath by taking a steadying breath in and using your exhale to blow out the grief from wherever it is stored in you. You could also imagine inviting the grief in whatever place it lives in you, whatever shape or form it's taking, simply to journey from that location and into your container. So in this space, I invite you to see if you can move that grief. Invite that grief to move. Dear ones, this grief isn't permanently gone. It will surely return in some other form. Hi, sweetie. There will be more grief in our lives, and it will catch itself in our bodies. If you want to, you can return to this grief at any time. You can also check in with your body again, listen to other places that need your attention. But this I know to be true, that attending to your grief, attending to our griefs, attending to your body can help you heal. It can strengthen your resilience and make space that you might be able to attend to other people's healing. So let's take one more moment of silence together. I'm going to ring the singing bowl one final time, and I invite you to go within one more time. Whether your mind draws you to the space where you're holding grief or draws you into your safe space, whether you're called to look at that grief now that held in your object, and offer a word of gratitude for your body, for the grief that has moved, for whatever accompanies you today. Let's take one more moment of silence, and then I invite you to listen with me to the song Spirit Found Us. But first, one more silence.
In desperation, we found freedom. In freedom, In love we found devotion. In devotion, Spirit found us. In desperation, we found freedom. In freedom, we found love. In love, we found devotion. In devotion, Spirit found us. In desperation, we found freedom. In freedom, we found love. In love, we found devotion. In devotion, Spirit found us. Spirit found us. Spirit found us.
Thank you, Brittany and Cassie and Amelia. Grief lives in our bodies. How many of you found grief somewhere within you? Maybe even grief that you didn't expect. Yeah, I found that too when I went through that ritual. It wasn't in the place that I expected it. I wasn't about the thing that I expected it to be about, but there it was. Grief lives in our bodies, but we were not born for grief. I know that I have not even remotely begun to become aware of, let alone process or integrate all that I have learned and all that has changed within me and within my life since welcoming our baby Nova into our lives 4 months ago. It is so much. All of you who are parents and guardians know this thing that I did not know before now. It is so much beauty, so much fear, and love and longing and exhaustion and grief and happiness all ricocheting through my being all the time. I haven't begun to really unpack any of it, but for the past few weeks, my partner Kai, who is taking on the majority of childcare now that I am back at church, has said several times to me, he said, being with Nova reminds me that we were born to be joyful. We were born to be joyful. And Kai says this because when Nova wakes up from a nap or in the morning, even sometimes in his 5 wake ups in the middle of the night on some nights, he'll open his eyes and he'll see one of our faces and he'll just smile. It's the simplest smile. It just is eyes closed, eyes open, taking a beat to recognize a face, and then totally lighting up. When his needs are met, when he's not hungry, when he's not tired, when he has a clean diaper, when he's not hot or cold, he's just joyful. He is just joyful. He gazes up with awe at the leaves that wiggle on trees above him in his stroller. He loves just watching ceiling fans so much that he attempts to have these deep conversations with them. Sometimes he just gets very still and just stares at a particularly shiny light, or he listens intently to music, or he shakes his whole being to a good beat. He's just a joyful little being. Before we adult people, older children people, youth people, before we became sleepless with pain and worry at some point in our lives, before we became knotted up with grief or fear or rage, we were joyful. And some of us get a long time to exist in this joyful, uncomplicated state. Some of us are introduced to the complications of life more early. But though there are days when it seems like our lives are taken over by this grief or anxiety, when that feels like it's the biggest thing in front of us, that simple joy that we arrive with when we enter this world is always there too. Watching Nova's joy somehow touches something, some forgotten joy that has lived deep within me for my whole life. And what we know from science, from geologists, is that 98% of the Earth's fresh water exists as groundwater. 98% is groundwater, that massive body of water beneath the ground on which we journey. Groundwater lives in the bedrock beneath the surface, beneath the soil, beneath nearly all of life as we know it. 98% of the Earth's fresh water lives there. And eventually, this groundwater flows out into streams and lakes and the ocean. Groundwater is what we tap into when we dig wells. It is underneath everything, and it nourishes so much of what is essential to us. But much of the time, we forget that groundwater even exists, right? We forget how important it is that we are tapped into it. It's often only when a river or when a highway crew has cut into the land and exposes a cliff of rock that I even notice groundwater exists. And then all of a sudden I'm driving down the highway and look to the side and see a cluster of icicles that are somehow flowing down the center of a rock cliff. And I remember that water flows beneath it all. Water flows in the middle of the rock. Whether I see it or not, whether I remember it's there or not, and it is this water that nurtures my being and all of life above it. So when grief and disappointment and anxiety that live in my body begin to overwhelm me, I seek to remember the other truth, that we were born to be joyful, that inherent joy runs beneath us all the time, and maybe 98% of it is unseen. And yet it nourishes us even when we forget it's there. So what if, despite all of those knots of grief that we saw when we looked within us today, what if beneath all of the debris of anxiety that spins like trash in the wind in our minds, what if beneath all of that stuff, we always have the ability to tap into the joy that comes with those tiny babies when they enter the world? Through these past few months, I've noticed that life has been hard and exhausting, and life has been rich and beautiful, and I have mourned the isolation we are stuck with, and I've given thanks for a healthy life that has come through me. Part of how I have stayed present despite all of that, in the midst of all of that, is to try to learn from Nova how to tap back into that unseen joy. So as he looks up with awe at the wiggling leaves above him, we too look up with awe and remember that there are leaves above us dancing in the wind. I've spent a lot more time looking up at our ceiling fans and enjoying how really beautiful it is when they spin. When your basic needs are met, when you aren't hungry or tired, when you're clean, when you've managed whatever pain your body holds as best you can, I invite you also to take a moment and just connect with one of these simple somethings that can make you smile. The soft fur of a pet, an icy drink on a hot day, the scent of lavender growing outside a neighbor's house when you're out for a stroll, a song that makes you want to move your body, the simple smile of a loved one. This groundwater of joy, this joy we were born for, this joy that is maybe even 98% unseen in our lifetimes. No one gave this joy to us, so no one can take it away. It is always there, even beneath the deserts of our lives, to tap into and to nourish the life that lives above it. May it be so, and amen.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.